Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about how the cell regulates the cell cycle and what happens when it loses the ability to regulate that. In the last video, we talked about the cell cycle itself. So the cell cycle is controlled by regulatory proteins that are both coming from inside the cell and outside the cell. There are intrinsic and extrinsic controls to cell division and the cell cycle. So cell division is important for a lot of things. It's for growing, but it's also for repairing injured, damaged tissue. Break a bone, forms a blood clot, and then we've got to replace the damaged cells with new healthy cells. And one thing, so the cells at the edge of an injury are going to be stimulated, and they're going to start dividing rapidly to replace those damaged cells. As the injury heals, the cell division rate begins to drop, the cell division slows down, and things kind of go back to normal. So one of the important molecules in the process of regulating cell division is a group of molecules called cyclins and cyclin-dependent kinases. And so their discovery has helped us understand cell division, but also helped us understand what happens when the cell loses its ability to control cell division. So in cells that are undergoing mitosis, scientists continue to find a certain type of protein called a cyclin. And so we began to figure out what it was. They took this protein, they isolated the protein, they took it, put it in non-dividing cells, and lo and behold, the cells started to divide. So one of the cyclins helps form the mitotic spindle, and that's the first one they discovered. So a cyclin is any protein that regulates the cell cycle. Basically, as the cell goes through the stages of the cell cycle, it starts producing cyclins, which will then allow the cell to move on to the next phase after it's completed everything it needs to do in that phase it's going through. So again, we said there was internal and external regulators. Internal regulators respond to events that are going on inside the cell. Let cell cycle proceed only when certain steps have already happened. Those are our cyclins. Respond to events from outside the cell. Direct cells to speed up or slow down the cell cycle, not to really stop it or start it, but to regulate the rate. These would be growth factors. And there are lots of growth factors, and we're starting to understand how they're important in the functioning of living things as well. Wound healing is important. The development of an embryo from the fertilized egg also has a lot of growth factors that allow it to work in the way that it does. Sometimes in development or in repair, the opposite of mitosis needs to happen. We need cells to not divide, but to basically die. Apoptosis is programmed cell death. And you might wonder, why would that be important? Well, if you think about in the development embryo, when the hands form and the fingers and toes form, there's webbing between those, and that needs to break down. That's apoptosis. In healing after a broken bone, there's a lot of extra bone tissue that gets formed that you have to get rid of. Sometimes when a cell's supposed to divide and it continues to divide, or supposed to stop dividing and continues to divide, it can lead to cancer and a tumor formation. So cancer is not something from outside your body. It might be caused by something outside the body, but cancer is when your body cells lose the ability to control cell division. The cell cycle goes berserk. It doesn't stop dividing when normal cells would. Normally when cells get really close packed together, they stop dividing. Keeps them from overcrowding. When cells, and cells have a kind of a lifespan. The chromosomes have these things called telomeres on their ends that every time the cell divides, the chromosome gets a little shorter. And when the telomeres get so short, that cell is going to live out its life, but it's not going to divide anymore because it would start to possibly lose important bits of the chromosome. In cancer, those things don't work. So a tumor is a mass of your own body cells that don't function normally. They typically don't look normal. And the problem is they replace normal healthy tissue. So the organ that the tumor forms in doesn't work like it should. Now, not all tumors are cancerous. So what makes someone cancerous when not? Non-cancerous tumors or benign cancers are things that will not spread to surrounding healthy tissues or other parts of the body. So how does cancer form? A cell begins to divide abnormally, produces a tumor, starts to displace normal cells and tissues, and then it gets into the bloodstream and starts to spread to other parts of the body. We call that metastasis. Once a tumor, once cancer has spread, it makes it much, much harder to treat because you're not looking at just one place in the body, but any place those abnormal cells land or stop, they're going to make a new tumor. Much harder to treat. That's why early detection is so important. If we can catch cancer before it metastasizes, it's much easier to treat. So in all cancers, no matter where it happens, no matter what mutation has caused it, it's caused the cell cycle to lose its control. Now, there are certain genes that we know play important roles in cancers, and they're genes that regulate the cell cycle. So cancer results from defects or mutations in genes that control cell growth and division. We call these tumor suppressor genes or proto-oncogenes are the two types of, and depending on what the mutation is. And typically one mutation in those genes isn't enough to cause the cell to lose the ability to control cell division. Typically it's several mutations. And that's why typically most cancers happen as people get older, because it takes time for those mistakes in copying the DNA to build up. Now, sometimes cancer can be caused by an outside agent, something from outside your body. We call those things carcinogens because they cause mutations in these genes which can lead to cancer. So how do we treat cancer? Well, the easiest way usually is to cut out the tumor, and if we get all of the cancer cells, the cancer is gone. But oftentimes there's concern that maybe we don't have all the cells. Sometimes we will use radiation to destroy cancer cells, and especially in places we can't do surgery, like in the brain. Chemotherapy kills cancer cells or slows their growth. The problem with the traditional chemotherapy drugs is they target actively dividing cells, and so the cells that are growing in your body, like your hair cells, like in your bone marrow, are also affected by the chemotherapy. So people lose their hair, they develop anemia, their immune system is affected because of the attacks on these non-cancer cells. Newer chemotherapy treatments can be targeted just to the cancer, and so they have less side effects. And the newest way is what we call immunotherapy. We have these cells in our immune system called NK cells, which can destroy cancer cells. The problem is because they're our own cells, they're not great at recognizing them. So by training our immune system to recognize a cancer cell, we can cause our own immune system to attack the cancer and kill it better.